In this video, I'm doing another old school pen and ink drawing. This time I'm going to illustrate my take on one of the new Shadowdark classes, the Wyrdling. A couple of weeks ago, I tried my hand at doing an old school illustration of a lizard folk wizard. It was a monster made by my pal Michael at Night Noon Games, who is doing the Shadowdark conversion for my Dragontown book. Well, he's also been helping Kelsey over at the Arcane Library to get their new Kickstarter up and going for Shadowdark's first official campaign setting, the Western Reaches. Definitely go check out the Kickstarter page. The campaign is going nuts, and honestly, if you clicked on this video, you probably already know about it. I'm really excited about the whole thing. If you know me, you know that I love adventures and settings, and this one is huge and awesome looking. The books are going to be amazing, and there's 3 new Cursed Scroll zines that include a bunch of new classes, one of them being this Wyrdling that I'm sketching right now. I love the idea of the Shadowdark class, an adventurer who spends too much time down in the Shadowdark and starts to mutate and change. You know, they're turning slimy and they even grow an extra like pseudopod limb. If you ask me, it's really like the perfect dungeon delver. I mean, I guess actually the other class in the Dwellers of the Deep zine is called the Delver, but whatever. Weirdo slime guy is where it's at. So I'm approaching this sketch the same way I did as the last one, just figuring out a pose with simple shapes and then adding more and more details as I go. I want this Wyrdling to really show the extra pseudopod limb. And my thought was, since this guy's always down in the Shadowdark, he probably has a torch, and I think that's going to give this illustration this nice light source that I can work with. I was also thinking this dude could be a half-elf, one of the new races in the Western Reaches setting. With the pointy ears and the hollow eyes, he's kind of looking vampire-ish, but I think that's okay. Vampires, Wyrdlings, they both spend too much time in the dark. Now, his pose is kind of simple, but I think it's telling the story of exploring this dark area, and really I want to focus on the texture and the shading this time. In the last illustration, I struggled a little bit deciding whether the texture should be like a design element or if it should be used to create value in shading. This time I'm thinking more about value. As I'm sketching, I'm trying to kind of keep that in my mind, and I'm just really scribbling in where the dark areas will be on this sketch. Once everything's looking good, then I'm going to tape my sketch. For the sketch, I use a regular sheet of printer paper, but I'm taping that to the back of a piece of smooth Bristol board. Then I'm going to use a Lightbox to trace over the drawing on the new Bristol board sheet of paper with my micron pens. Now, obviously, you can just ink right on top of the pencils, but in the last video, I was too impatient and started erasing early and smudged a bunch of ink. This way, I can avoid all that, and I don't have to do any erasing at all. Now, I'm starting the inking process by outlining the figure, or at least the top left of the figure. I have this torch light source planned, and I want to kind of figure that out first. To get at this gradient value, just using black and white, I've decided to use a simple, straightforward cross-hatching texture. This is kind of like the Zen mode texture I talk about in some of my other dungeon map videos. It's really just little hatch marks repeated and then rotated. The only difference is that these hatch marks overlap each other, and the more they overlap, the darker it gets. So I started with the vertical lines, then adding horizontal lines over top of it, and then rotating the page and doing diagonal lines. And each step I'm sort of receding those lines, like not making them overlap all the way. Each step is getting further and further away from the torch light source. You know, so the more the hatch lines overlap, the darker the value gets. It's really just more black ink than white paper. And hopefully you can see how the value changes the further it gets away from the torchlight. And eventually it gets all the way to solid black, so I'm going to spend some time filling in all that. I guess I should say that I'm using Sakura micron pens in a variety of sizes. I think like a 0.5 for these hatch marks, all the way up to like a size 12. I really love using these pens to ink with because they have a nice uniform line. I'll have links to all the tools I'm using in this video and the Western Reaches Kickstarter down in the description. Once I'm done coloring in all of the black, it's kind of a tedious process, but worth it. Then I get to move on to the fun part, inking the character details. So I'm tackling the torch first. Not quite sure if it's coming out exactly as I had planned. Kind of looks like a strange cigarette or something. You know, maybe this Wyrdling's getting really high down in the Shadowdark. But whatever. It looks like a torch, right? Moving on to the face, basically I'm just tracing over what I already sketched out. I'm adding little dots and scratch marks with a pen in hopes of making this guy look super dirty and grungy. I just really like drawing faces with these evocative expressions. My original idea was this Wyrdling was going to be snooping through the dungeon carefully, but with this expression it kind of looks like he's found you lurking around in his territory and is not exactly happy about it. I want the dagger to stand out against the background in his chainmail tunic, so I'm not giving it too much shading, you know, trying to keep it really bright and mostly white. And then I'm moving on to this chainmail texture. I start by filling in the tunic with these little U shapes. I'm trying to follow the shape of the tunic, so the U's are always pointing down towards the bottom part. On the torso, they're pointing straight down, but on the lifted up sleeves, they're pointed towards the bottom of the sleeve, not just straight down like the rest of the tunic, if that makes sense. This is just a bunch of U's staggered to create this pattern. It's really easy to do if you just have a little bit of patience. And as you can see, I'm not being too careful about lining everything up perfectly. The nice thing about these old school styles of drawings is you can get a little messy. And for most of the drawing, I'm just doing more hatching for the shading, but not the super flat kind like the background. I'm really trying to follow the contours of the body and the folds in the fabric as best I can. I think with this chainmail tunic, I'm sort of realizing that I need a little more practice at this hatching stuff. The whole thing is getting more and more flat looking as I add more and more darker values. Then for the pseudopod limb, I want to do a totally different kind of texture to really give it a sort of slimy feeling. I'm using a thicker pen to make these sort of like chunky squiggles inside the line art, and I'm making sure that none of this texture goes all the way up to the outer outline of the pseudopod limb. My thought is it's like the dark background is kind of reflecting through the slime, right? Then I'm moving on to the boots. I really like drawing this fur. It's just more hatching, but I'm trying to make it look like it sort of flows over the top of the boot. And then just a little more hatching to give the boot some shading. Again, just trying to follow the contours. My hope is that by seeing this whole process play out, you might want to try drawing your own character. It's super, super fun getting inspired by what your friends are making and then sitting down and spending a little bit of your own time exploring it with a drawing. If you'd like some help learning how to draw characters, I have other videos on this channel, and I also just released a guidebook on my Patreon called Drawing Heroes. It's available digitally right now on the Patreon, and it'll be in my online shop in zine form sometime soon. So let me know what you think of this half-elf Wyrdling, and definitely go check out the Shadowdark Western Reaches campaign. If you're like me and you love TTRPG's adventures, this one is a must-get. All the links are in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya!